Hello, welcome to this Hoop Collective free agency special. I'm joining you from New York City, where we have some interesting free agent news already here on Wednesday afternoon, right before the start of free agency. Joining me from down the street, he was here with me at the Seaport Studios, but he wanted to get away from me, and that's Tim Bontemps.
Hello, guys.
MacMahon, I've been, joining us from Dallas, Texas is Ben MacMahon.
Howdy, partners.
Man, I've been spending way too much time with Bontemps across this country over the last 2 months.
You are a glutton for punishment. I'll be sending you guys soon. We'll be sending you a nice, shiny Jalen Brunson. Waiting for a call from him. So, in case he needs any packing help down here, I might be able to volunteer my services.
Well, let me tell you, they're very excited here. There's people pouring into the streets chanting Jalen Brunson's name. MacMahon, you kind of got a hint that earlier this week that the Mavericks kind of got a feel that the bidding was too high on Brunson. We talked about this on and off. It's obviously, if you follow the NBA at all, you know that the Knicks have made moves to acquire Jalen Brunson. Mm-hmm. And I know that we're in free agency and we should be looking forward and talking about being forward, but this is not a great moment for the Mavs organization. This is happening.
It's tough. And they went from really having extreme confidence that they would keep Brunson. And that kind of steadily diminished over the last, couple weeks, 3 weeks, maybe. And then it got to a point this week where it was just like, whoa, the Knicks are willing to put that on the table. Brunson's gone.
Which we think is going to be in excess of 4 years, in excess of $100 million.
Right. I heard 105. I've seen 110 reported. We'll see where it ends up. But I mean, once it got in excess of 25 mil plus. And here's the thing: the Mavericks. Let's just he was not restricted, and we don't have to go back through the little gaffe in the rookie contract, which was negotiated by Leon Rose, by the way, that made him unrestricted. But he was not restricted. So it's not like the Mavericks had the right to match. And I do believe that given the way things played out this season in the negotiations with him when he was extension eligible all the way, through the playoffs, that they would have had to outbid the Knicks. So if he's getting,
think if he had gotten, when you say, you think if he had gotten offered the same amount for both, he would have gone to New York?
I think so. And I say that because of the obvious deep family ties with, Rick Brunson, his dad, is going to be on the Knicks coaching staff. He's known Tibbs, Rick Brunson has, since he was a teenager. Tibbs, used to work him out when Rick Brunson was in high school and Tibbs was coaching at Salem State. That's how far back they go. And this is the third time that Rick Brunson will be on Tibbs' coaching staff in the NBA. Then obviously Leon Rose has known Jalen, since before he could walk. Rick Brunson
was his first client.
Yeah, his first client. Leon's, I don't know if he's officially his godfather, but he's essentially the second father figure in his life. I mean, one of Jalen's best friends is Leon's son Sam, who also happens to be one of Jalen's agents. I mean, here's
the thing: like Bontemps. We're in an era where allegedly the NBA is cracking down on tampering. Like, I don't think you can accuse a father of tampering with his son. And by the way, Leon's son is one of Jalen's agents, as MacMahon just said. Like, it goes both ways for Leon. Mm-hmm. And like,
well, and I think, I mean, to me, there's two things about this, right? Let's start with the Mavericks side. To me, this is a colossal failure on Dallas's part in terms of asset management. And let's go back to January. Forget about before that. As you've reported, MacMahon, Jalen Brunson went to the Mavs in January and said, you guys offer me the max extension you can offer me, which is 4 for, let's say 55. It's around that number. It's round number.
55.6. Same extension Dorian Finney-Smith signed.
If you put this on the table right now in January, Jalen Brunson, will sign it. I'll be with the Mavericks. Mavericks said, we're going to wait. Maybe there's a 1% chance we could trade you for a star in a month. That was a gigantic failure on their part. You had to look at the market, see that wasn't going to happen. You have Jalen Brunson. That would have been a good contract to have him on, even if it's not a great contract, perfectly fine value contract at the time.
That would have been a great.
No, I agree. I'm just saying, even before the playoff run he had, that everyone would have looked at and said, that's good value for Dallas to do that. The fact that they passed on that and allowed it to get to this point where the Knicks can pay Jalen Brunson literally twice that much and take him out of Dallas, it's just a colossal failure on Dallas's part, especially given that there's a very good chance they'll get literally nothing out of it. And they'll be sitting here holding the bag with their second best player through this conference finals run off the team. Now let's go to the Knicks side of it. The Knicks, look, Jalen Brunson's a really good player. He does a lot of things that winning teams need, right? There's a reason he won a couple titles at Villanova. There's a reason he's been a successful player for the Dallas Mavericks. People have gotten very mad at me on Twitter today because I said the Knicks were desperate in the way they've gone after Jalen Brunson on TV earlier today. You can't look at this situation, though, and see it any other way than the Knicks are a desperate team in the way they pursue Jalen Brunson. Because, look, Jalen's a really good player. He's not going to change the trajectory of the Knicks. He's just not. And to pay him $110 million to be on this team with Julius Randle and RJ Barrett and Evan Fournier, a team that I'm not sure is going to be in the play-in tournament next year, it just doesn't make sense when you look at the assets the Knicks have given up to clear the space to do it. So to me, you can argue it's an asset management failure on both sides for totally different reasons. Whereas if Jalen Brunson's on the Mavs, he's really helping a really good team. I mean, it's just, but for Dallas, and you could speak to a lot better, McMahon. If I'm a Mavs fan today, I'm really mad because the Mavs got worse. Well, right. The Mavs got a lot worse, and they did because the organization simply just completely botched this from start to finish.
Right. And I got a little pushback today on Brunson's willingness to sign that extension in January. But you know what? I'm not buying off the record pushback when Rick Brunson told me that on the record. I can give you the quote. I ran the quote in April, didn't get any pushback on the time. Jalen confirmed it then as well. And so, yeah, you could have had him on a 4-year, $56 million extension when you keep him on the roster. He would have been an extremely valuable commodity in the trade market. He probably would have been, just like Dorian Finney-Smith will be going forward. When teams call the Mavericks, Dorian Finney-Smith will be the first name they ask about. Jalen Brunson will be as well. The Mavericks were very confident, and they knew before the trade deadline, okay, hey, oops, that's going to cost us. He's outplayed that. So, they said, hey, you want to take it? No. Finney-Smith decided to take it in. But they were very confident at the time that they would be able to keep him. That's why there were plenty of teams that inquired about trading for him then. That's why the Mavericks said, no, he's part of our future going forward. We don't feel like we need to salvage an asset for him now. And then I think where the Mavs underestimated, they looked at the cap space teams and didn't think there would be an attractive fit for Brunson or, vice versa. I think they underestimated how, I don't want to say easy, but just how, I don't know what other word to put it. I mean, let's be honest. You talk about all the assets the Knicks gave up. What assets? They didn't give up a whole lot of assets to get off that salary. They gave up this year's number 11 pick. They got two, maybe
I would say
first for that.
I would say giving up this year's number 11 pick for pretty mediocre future picks.
Okay.
To clear space.
My point is, if you look at, they came out of that plus on first round picks. Now we'll see how those protections play out. The fact that they did not have to give up a 1 to move Alec Burks and Nerlens Noel surprised me, surprised the Mavericks. The Mavericks at that point
surprised a lot of people in the league today too.
Yeah, the Mavericks at that point felt like, well, hey, if they want to pay Brunson that kind of money, they're gonna have to clear that space. Maybe we can work a sign and trade and get a pick back, something like that. Obviously, that didn't happen. But the one thing the Knicks could offer offer Brunson that the Mavericks could not is the ball. The show. Hey, you're our point guard. You're running this offense. This is going to be your team. Obviously, that was never going to be the case in Dallas. I do believe that Rick Brunson really kind of pushed that on Jalen as, dude, like, you need that. You are that kind of a player. And hey, if you're Jalen Brunson, you put up really good numbers in the games Luka missed this year, then you go into the playoffs. And, unfortunately for him, he doesn't get to face the Jazz perimeter defense all 82 games next year. But, in a playoff series, you've got a 41-point game and a win. You've got a 31-point game and a win. Why wouldn't he want that role, that responsibility moving forward? I tell you what, the biggest trip in all of this is how much better off would both teams have been if the Knicks would have taken the Mavs trade proposal going into, I botch years, going into the Halliburton trade. The Mavs offered Brunson 18 and 31 to move up to 8 and they offered it to, not just the Knicks, obviously, but to other teams as well, because they really wanted Halliburton, who, boy, would he be a great sidekick for Luka. And you'd have him under control for a couple more years than restricted. The Knicks would probably have Brunson locked up on that extension.
Yeah.
At 18, maybe they pick Sadiq Bey. They wouldn't have Toppin, but both franchises would be in much better shape. And Leon Rose is the one who turned that one down.
No question. No question.
What do you think Luka's viewpoint of this is going to be? Obviously, when they did the Porzingis deal, they brought in Spencer Dinwiddie. I don't know if at the time they were like, well, this will be our Brunson replacement, but they have another guard to play with him who's a quality player. Tim Hardaway is coming back from that injury, right. But where do you think Luka is now? Luka right now is playing for Slovenia in the Euro. It's the Euro
he's playing World Cup qualifiers. Obviously has Eurobasket later on this off season. I mean, he has to be disappointed. He did have him and Brunson are buddies. They're draft classmates. They came in together. They kind of grew together. Brunson really did adapt to be a great sidekick to Luka. I mean, he was, he adapted to be a very good player off the ball, somebody who, put his ego to the side, didn't need, and he talked about this to me during the playoffs, was able to kind of get to the point where he didn't need necessarily a rhythm to be effective. He learned how to be Luka's sidekick, and then the, 10, 12 minutes per game, Luka's off the floor, it was going to be his show to run. So when the Mavericks made the Porzingis trade, again, they absolutely planned on Brunson being part of the future going forward. But at the time I was told, hey, if for some reason things don't work out with Jalen, Dinwiddie is some, is some insurance there. Tim Hardaway Jr. didn't play at all in the playoffs. They feel like, okay, he's coming. And I'll be honest, if they'd have re-signed Brunson, I think they would have tried to move either Dinwiddie or Hardaway. Now they need them both. They feel, okay, hey, at least we can fill in some of the scoring. I think Goran Dragic, who's obviously got a great relationship with Luka, I don't know how much gas is left in the tank, but I do think he ends up in Dallas.
Seems like a very likely minimum signing there.
Right. And they were asked about it at a joint press conference for the Slovenian national team, and they kind of looked at each other and laughed and said, Luka said, basically, I'm not paying a fine. And Dragic said, we can talk about that July 1st. So I think Dragic ends up in Dallas, which has been rumored for, honestly, people thought he was going to end up in Dallas last year, and it didn't happen. But hey, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that losing the second leading scorer, who is just entering his prime from a team that just went to the West Finals and getting nothing in return, is not a big blow. It absolutely is. And I can't imagine that Luka is going to be overjoyed by that. I think my guess is he will understand Brunson's decision, but be disappointed.
Well, no, go ahead, Brian.
So the issue with Dallas, they are now a luxury taxpayer.
Less now.
Well, a lot less. But their team, is now just the players that they had are just more expensive. Luka's got a $25 million raise, I think, kicking in July 1st.
Right. Luka's Supermax kicks in.
Finney Smith. So Finney Smith's contract comes up. So Dallas is just, they're limited options to replace Brunson, and they're limited options to improve. And coming off of a Western Conference Finals, you're hoping to add to the roster, and so that's that's a bit disappointing. So,
and the team that the guy I think there is atop their list is Gary Payton II, and that's not a perfect Brunson replacement, but it is a guy who can, in a much different way, play next to Luka, and I think thrive next to Luka. I think he, in a lot of ways, he would be a really fun, good fit. Again, totally different player, but I think he gives you some things that Brunson didn't. Obviously, he's not giving you the ability to create and score. But I think that there's going to be a lot of interest in Gary Payton II, and it's going to take that full taxpayer mid-level, and he might end up with more.
All right. So Bontemps, the Knicks finished 11th place in the East last year. They had 37 and 45. They missed the play-in by 6 games, just to be in the play-in, just to miss 10th place, not the 7th place, for 10th place.
Yep.
Derrick Rose was injured, and that killed them. Their point guard play was terrible. How many more wins does Jalen Brunson, and I do think that there's a chance a decent chance, I should say, they're going to re-sign Mitchell Robinson. How many, what kind of a difference does this make? I do think it's going to help them. But
I think they'll be better, but Washington got better today, right? They traded for Monty Morris and Will Barton. They were right around the same record, and Bradley Beal missed half the season. If Bradley Beal is healthy next year and plays on the Wizards and they have their team, they might be better. Are they better than Charlotte? Probably not. Are they better than Cleveland? Maybe, I guess. Are they better than Atlanta? No. Are they better than Brooklyn? No. Chicago? No. Toronto? No. They're not better than anybody else. So,
Brooklyn's a big TBD. Who knows?
Sure. I guess, but still, if you look at it, the Knicks are a borderline play-in team. And they were a borderline play-in team before getting Jalen Brunson. And that's the thing. Like I said, Jalen Brunson's a really good player. And to me, when I said the asset management on the Knicks part was bad, it's that you gave up the 11th pick, you give up this other stuff to create the cap space to then overpay Jalen Brunson, right? Jalen's a really good player, but if the Mavericks were paying him the same contract, I'd feel a lot better about it, because he's on a team where he can make a huge difference on a team that's got a chance to go deep in the playoffs. Instead, you're paying this guy who's already in his mid to late 20s. I think he's going to be 26 or 27 this year. You're paying him around, so you're paying him $27 million to be on a team that's fighting for 10th. It's just not the Knicks. It's just not a smart move for a Knicks team that really should be trying to either rebuild or move forward. And instead, they're just trying to tread water, get into 10th. It's sort of they're sort of like the Kings in the East right now. It's just not a move that makes sense for where they are at. It's not about Jalen Brunson, the player, who's a really good player.
Okay. So we're actually recording this right as the option deadline is about to pass. Bradley Beal at this moment just opted out of his contract to become a free agent. That is good news for the Wizards. If he had opted into his contract, that could have been a problem, because then he could have been seeking a trade. Opting out clears the way for a 5-year, $248 million deal. And the Wizards have been saying privately for months, we're going to offer this deal, and Bradley Beal, we think, is going to take it. There's been varying level of rumors over the last year and a half about Beal and this situation. He extended his contract a year, a couple of years ago, to put himself in this position. I don't know how good of a contract this is going to be. Washington has found itself in bad contracts in the past. They gave Gilbert Arenas a huge deal at one point, and then he got hurt right away. They gave Antoine Jameson a huge deal, I remember. Bradley Beal is John Wall. Sorry, I knew there was a list, and I'd forgotten who else was on it.
John Wall, who made about $85 million from the Rockets, not play a second over the last year plus.
Crazy.
They did get a first-round pick for him, though. That was a worthwhile deal. I thought that was good management. Because they would have had to play Westbrook similar money, right?
Yeah, they were stuck, and they got half of what ended up being half of Alperen Şengün.
Right, that's true.
And the pick that's now in the Knicks' possession.
That's right. So I understand why Washington's doing this. I understand why they've done big contracts in the past. I just wonder if 2-3 years from now we're going to be like, wow, Bradley Beal's making $60 million. God bless him, though.
We said it 100 times. I thought they should have been shopping Beal. I thought at a certain point you can only be mediocre for so long. There's nothing worse than being mediocre and expensive. And I just don't see how
Bradley Beal's not mediocre. He's a great player, but
but Bradley Beal what's the ceiling for I'm not talking about Beal. I'm talking about the Wizards as a team. What's the ceiling for the Wizards on a team with Bradley Beal?
Well, the Wizards were 8 games out of the play-in last year.
Well, I mean, Beal missed half the season, but this is really the same it's the same discussion, right? You're paying Bradley Beal $250 million for a team that's fighting for 10th. You're between Brunson, Evan Fournier, Julius Randle, and if the Knicks extend RJ Barrett for any kind of extension, you're paying those guys $400 million between them over the next few years to be a team that's fighting for 10th. Like, it's just not where, like you said, McMahon, where are these teams going? Like,
Well,
they're
and-
just
and-
sort
and-
of staying in neutral.
And let me ask you this question. 5-year deal. In the 5th year of that contract, which team would you bet on? Know what you know now. In the 5th year of that contract, would you bet on the Wizards or the, I'm going to say the Thunder Rockets? To pick two teams that are full-fledged rebuild.
Well,
mode.
I don't know if it's fair to pick the 5th year. They probably know the 5th year is not going to be the best year. What
Okay,
they're doing
the
is
4th
paying
year.
for 1, 2, and 3. They're hoping that years 1, 2, and 3 are pretty darn good.
And Brad is
And then you're just
29. And Brad is 29, and he'll be 33 at the end of that. He turned 29 yesterday, actually. So he'll be 33 at
Happy
the end of
birthday.
that. He'll be exactly right.
Yeah.
He'll be 33 at the end
Mine's
of that
August
deal.
30th, just in case you guys want to have a little GoFundMe.
I'll ship your birthday present to you to Dallas for your wedding in a few weeks. But
Oh, the one that Wendy's boycotting? Okay.
that's right. See who your real friends are here. But look, I think Beal is young enough that maybe the end of that deal isn't going to be terrible, right? It's not like James Harden, some of these other guys where you're signing a 5-year extension potentially that's going to take you to 38 when you're like, the end of it's going to be bad. Like, Bradley Beal's still probably going to be a pretty good player at 33.
$60 million player?
Well, no, I'm not saying he's going to be worth 60 million, but he
Has
might
he
be
ever
worth,
been?
I mean, no. Well, I mean, that gets into, you could get into arguments about like how much star players in the league should get. But yeah, like, look, it's a lot of money for Bradley Beal. But I get it. At least
It's
for
a
the
lot
Wizards.
of money for a top 20 player who's closer
Yes.
to 20 than he is to 10.
Yes, I agree. Now, at least from their standpoint, you could say, all right, the fact that they've waited this long to get him under contract, maybe they could flip him in the next couple of years if they decide to finally bottom out and rebuild. But it is the same question, though. It's like, where are the Wizards going? Where are the Knicks going? These teams every year are picking around 10th in the draft. They're picking okay players. They have okay, a bunch of okay guys on their team, but they're just stuck on a treadmill. And they're not going one way or the other. They're just stuck fighting for 10th place.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think that it would have been really interesting if Beal had made himself available on the open market and what teams might have done to get him. And there would have been 4 or 5 teams that probably would have ripped pieces apart to get him. I mean, there would have been more than that if he was truly available, but he would have been probably pretty picky. And that right there explains the demand. And that right there explains why the Wizards are doing it. But this is one of those deals where, as big as it is for them, you're just kind of like, wow, I just don't know if it works out. But that's the name of the NBA. Talent is at such a premium. We have an interesting situation with James Harden. By the time this video comes out, it's possible that we'll have a little bit more clarity. So we're talking with not quite a full set of information here. It appears like James Harden is going to opt out of his contract, which is actually kind of fascinating because when he was traded to Philadelphia, the Sixers wanted Harden to opt into that contract. In fact, from what I hear, the Nets prepared the paperwork as part of their maneuver to actually execute the trade, and Harden didn't sign it. And
a lot
it
of
wasn't
stuff to
100.
pack when you're going from Brooklyn to Philly. It's a long trip.
He was asked about it, and he's like, "Oh, I was just focused on the move and everything." And he gave sort of a ridiculous answer. And the reason he did it was because he wanted to have optionality. He didn't want to be locked into anything. The reason Philly did it was like, look, we're trading all these assets, players and picks and everything like that. We don't want to get to the summer and you want to switch teams again. They wanted to be protected. So this is what happens in life. Things are always changing. So Harden wasn't great. He was good. His numbers are really good. When you look back, you don't remember much good play, but the numbers are pretty good, Bontemps. He averaged like 20, 10, and 7. Is that right? Or something like that?
When I'll look up the exact numbers, but he's still, even if he's not a top 5 player at this point, James Harden is still a very good basketball player. There's no question about that. He averaged 22, 10, and 7 and 7.7 over the course of the season.
He averaged 18.6, 5.7, and 8.6 in the playoffs, which is what matters.
You ain't lying. I'm not debating.
And it wasn't a pretty 18.6.
That is true.
But I will say
there for it.
that we talked throughout that and said, you cannot pay this man $250 million. You cannot give him. And guess what? They're not. they're not going to do it. And Harden is going to, it looks like Harden is going to agree. And not only does it look like he's going to agree, but it looks like he's going to bypass that option and become a free agent and then sign a deal that reduces his salary for next season. And then he's going to, build it back up. My guess is he's still going to get over $100 million guaranteed, but he ain't getting over 200. And by doing that, he's going to take his salary down to where the Sixers are going to be enough under the luxury tax that they're going to be able to use their full mid-level exception, which is 10 million and change, which they're targeting PJ Tucker for. And
if Harden's leaving money on the table, trust me, they're not targeting PJ Tucker. They've got an agreement.
I don't want to be accused of anything. So I've been saying all TV all day.
I'm saying Harden knows Tucker is coming.
All right.
If he's leaving money on the table, Harden knows. I mean, those guys travel to Europe.
Well, he's maybe not leaving money on the table. He may have agreed to a certain figure, and they're just balancing it differently, which could be splitting hairs. But he's going to potentially lower his salary down.
But if Harden wanted to make it messy, he has the leverage, right?
Harden has no problem making things messy now.
Well, we've seen it.
He is not afraid of that. But that's what I'm saying. Like, so the last two teams he's been on, he's left, kind of a disaster in his wake, and certainly would not be called team first, and certainly not even team friendly. So what he's doing here is he's doing something to help the Sixers rebuild the depth that they lost in large part when he was traded for. And they're going to have their biannual exception, which is $4 million in change, which
they might have their biannual exception. Again, this all depends on where Harden's number comes in too, right? Because you're talking about not only are you paying 10 million in the mid-level, you're also adding another 4 million in the biannual. So now you're talking about having to drop a bunch of money below the hard cap, which, just for a quick thing for listeners, if you use either the biannual exception or the full mid-level exception, or you get a player in a sign and trade, like when the Nets got Kevin Durant in a sign and trade, you're hard capped. You can't go over a certain number. That's why this Harden option matters. For teams that are way over the cap and they're just spending money, it doesn't matter. But that's why Harden opting out matters.
They seem to think that they're going to have it, Bontemps, because from what I'm told, they've let agents know that it's potentially available.
Daryl Morey is really good at math. If Daryl thinks he's going to have it, that means it's happening. Trust me, Daryl, you might, folks like us who need to use calculators might look at it and not be able to figure out if Daryl thinks he's got it.
To be clear, I certainly expect the Sixers. I've heard similar things. I expect the Sixers to have them, but I'm just laying it out for why it matters where the number comes in. That's all.
We're just trying to protect ourselves with their unknowns that are out there. People can come back on us, so we're just trying to be safe.
Also, Kyrie Irving. Just so we can say this as it's a live thing. Kyrie Irving has officially opted in before the 5 p.m. deadline, which it was fair to wonder if it was going to happen based off how things are going to break.
It's being announced it's being announced at 4:59. It came in at the last second. And there hasn't been a hard announcement yet. So I think it's fair to say he is not opting in, is doing that. But anyway, so let me ask you this, MacMahon. Does this change the narrative around James Harden? I mean, obviously it's ultimately going to determine by the condition he's in when he shows up and all that stuff, but does this I mean, this wasn't something I expected Harden. I mean, we've seen this momentum for the last 10 days. So it's not surprising in this moment, but if you'd have told me this was going to happen 3 months ago, I'd have told you, I don't think so. No way.
Well, he has to perform in the playoffs for a team that at least gets to the finals, I think, to change the narrative. And look, the narrative is he's one of the best players in NBA history who hasn't been able to win a championship, but who's also, like you said, left some really rough situations in his wake. Harden's told us, Bontemps, I believe you were at the press conference, that he'd do what it takes in terms of his negotiations to maximize the Sixers' chances of winning. So I would say that he is following through on his word. In terms of the negotiations, in terms of recruiting a piece that they desperately needed, Embiid begged for. I think he mentioned PJ Tucker by name, begged for that type of player. And
yes, he did. Giving 2 minutes. He gave a 2-minute soliloquy when I asked him about what he would like to see improved on the team. He talked about toughness. He talked about the fact that specifically he's never had a player like PJ Tucker on his team, and went on through all the things that PJ Tucker does.
And PJ Tucker is every superstar's favorite teammate. I promise Jimmy Butler's pained that PJ's leaving Miami.
Well, I'm not 100% sure he's leaving Miami. The Heat are still trying to.
I mean, you know, we will see what happens. But again, the fact if James Harden is taking this kind of a contract to create the ability to give PJ that full 10+ mil mid-level exception, I know the relationship those two have. Obviously spent time together in Houston. We're extremely close on and off the floor. That I would be.
And by the way, Daryl Morey has a relationship with PJ Tucker and has signed him to a mid-level contract before. So there's all sorts of ties.
I would say James Harden's got a better relationship.
Well,
because that last non-guaranteed year, that's the other thing. Very, very curious to see, are all 3 years fully guaranteed? Because the non-guaranteed year at the end of PJ's Houston deal did become kind of a source of contention at a certain point.
No question. But look, okay. I think when you look, you got something there, Brian?
No.
Oh, I just think when you look overall at the Sixers, to me, this is James Harden. James Harden has to prove he's going to win in the playoffs. Him opting out of money isn't going to change how people think about him. But this Sixers team needed defense, needed toughness, needed rebounding, needed athleticism.
And needed floor spacing, which PJ didn't move on offense other than setting the occasional screen. But you got to go to the corner.
But now you had PJ Tucker, you had De'Anthony Melton, who's a heck of a player. Thought was a terrific pickup by the Sixers last week. You talked about it on the draft pod. You combine those guys, maybe they can get. You mentioned Gary Payton with the mid-level in Dallas. Maybe the Sixers try to go after a guy like him or another guy on the perimeter who can do some stuff. All of a sudden, we talked so much during the playoffs about how this team couldn't guard anybody and they were just going to have to try to outscore teams. You had PJ and De'Anthony Melton and another defender this team. All of a sudden, the Sixers are a way different team than they were last year. And remember, they got to the second round of the playoffs with James Harden still not looking like himself after that hamstring injury. Maybe he'll be better after a full off season. But even if he's the same player, Joel Embiid was playing with a broken face and a broken thumb. So, the Sixers should, to me, if they can add these pieces, feel really confident that going into next season, they have a chance to be, to me, right at the top of the East. And they've got a real chance to make a run here. And it's going to be, if they can get this done, I think it's a big summer for them. If they can pull these pieces off and go into the preseason next year, as Brian said, having replaced this depth with guys like PJ Tucker and De'Anthony Melton, who are exactly the kind of guys. And probably
another guy that they use for the biennial.
Yep.
So
of some kind.
Okay. So, we'll see what happens with Tobias Harris. Tobias played well after the trade, then didn't play well in the playoffs. There's been some chatter out there. I've heard his name attached to a couple of teams. I don't know if they're calling about Tobias is calling, or if the Sixers are calling, or the other teams are calling. What I will say is that Tobias is extension eligible. It would be very hard for me to believe that there's an extension that isn't involving a pay cut, considering he makes over $35 million a year, I believe, or in the mid 30s.
He's due 38.5 and basically 41.
Okay. We don't typically see extensions for guys at this level where you extend and it's a pay cut, maybe mildly, but not potentially where that would happen. So I would say, even though he's eligible, I would be surprised if an extension gets done. It could happen. I don't know. But if an extension doesn't get done, that's an issue. We could see that he's got 2 years left. So it's not really an issue, but just getting that sort of out there. The restricted free agents every year, restricted free agency, it's a strange thing in the NBA. Teams use it as a weapon against players. Players, in certain circumstances, being a restricted free agent can benefit you. There's this real thin line that if you are a gettable restricted free agent, where a team thinks that it might be able to get you, that your team may not match. You may be able to get a contract that you couldn't get, even if you were a better player on a team that would match you. So it can sometimes, it most of the time works against you, but sometimes it can work for you. So this year, there are two guys who I would potentially refer to as gettable restricted free agents. One is DeAndre Ayton, who the Suns clearly do not intend to pay a max. If some team out there is willing to offer DeAndre Ayton a max contract, they're probably not getting matched, or close to it, probably not getting matched. Now, the problem is that doesn't look like he's got too many suitors out there.
Yeah,
The
that
Pistons,
Detroit situation dried up real quick.
well, the Pistons drafted a center and then traded for a center. They drafted
And don't have that space anymore because they used it.
That's
They
right.
used chunks.
And one more update. Our agent Wojnarowski has reported that James Harden has officially declined his player option.
Yeah, so that's not a surprise. That's what we expected to happen.
We'll agree to a deal that will give them that full mid-level.
Excuse me, sir. You cannot negotiate until 6 p.m. on June 30th.
Intends to, whatever.
Excuse me, sir. You cannot negotiate until 6 p.m. on June 30th.
As McMahon said,
how dare you imply that there has been any sort of tampering whatsoever by the Sixers, who have not talked to PJ Tucker yet.
Well, Daryl Morey has adopted James Harden, so they can have those father-son loophole.
That's a good point.
PJ Tucker is a happy man right now, I would say.
Yeah. Where was I? Oh, DeAndre Ayton.
DeAndre Ayton, and we're talking DeAndre Ayton and not in Detroit.
Yeah. So I'm not sure what's going to happen with Ayton. There could be a sign and trade there. This is a guy who, in my mind, has been pretty good the last 2 seasons. Has he been like dominating all-star? No, but he's been pretty good.
Dude.
He's been really good in the playoffs. He's a number 1 overall pick.
And you line up the last 20 or so, however many you want, line up all the number 1 overall picks. No, he ain't the best of them, but he's middle of the pack. He is not I don't forget who went after him in the draft. He has lived up to expectations as a number 1 overall pick.
I'm not going to go there.
Line up all the number 1 picks. He's a lot closer to Akeem than he is Olo Wakandi. I'll put it that way.
Well, when you frame it like that,
I mean,
I suppose that's true.
What I'm saying is, if you go through the last 20, he's somewhere like, 9, 10, 11. He ain't one of the best, but he hadn't been a bust.
I think there's a difference between saying that and saying he's lived up to expectations. He
was a major force on a team that had a 2-0 lead in the finals and came back and had the best record in basketball the next year.
He had a very good playoff run. He's a good player. To me, a good player is different than living up to expectations as a number 1 pick. If you're drafted somebody with the number 1 pick, you're expecting to get a star. You don't always get a star, but you expect to get a star. And he got drafted ahead of a few guys who look pretty damn good. And he's been good.
Well, and that's why we get back to like, you don't want to pay a center. Okay, then don't use the number 1 overall pick on him. Like,
that was
how are you going to
change?
How are you going to change your philosophy as a franchise that much when this guy has been good in a 4-year span? It's just it's bad. And if they let him walk for nothing, that would be just awful business to me.
I don't think they're going to.
I was going to say, I would say I feel somewhere between confident and very confident that will not happen. So I'm not sure he'll be on the Suns, but I think he'll be I think they will get something if he leaves.
So there was a brief time that Detroit seemed like the most likely destination. That's no longer the case, right? I would
keep an eye on Indiana. Indiana had some interest in him at the trade deadline last year. They ended up doing a different trade. Sabonis for Tyrese Halliburton. I did check on this back then. Indiana was interested, but Phoenix didn't want to touch their core. They thought they had a potential championship team there, and the Ayton thing was hanging over. They knew that they were nowhere close during contract negotiations last fall for an extension, and so they probably should have looked into it more, but they weren't able to do it. So keep an eye on Indiana. Now they have a guy in Miles Turner who has been floated in trade discussions for a while.
Indiana is also perpetually a team that is like ready, quote unquote, ready to trade guys and then doesn't trade guys too.
That's
true.
They did make a big deal last year though.
They did.
Another team to watch would be Minnesota. Minnesota is looking for a shot blocker. I know that they just drafted that young center.
Kessler.
Kessler is a backup, though, I think.
Yeah, and that Minnesota is one that certainly has come up a lot in the Rudy Gobert, trade scenarios. They seem determined that Cat will be a power forward and no longer.
Well, they're about to pay Cat
defense.
I would expect shortly after free agency opens that, and there's just no drama to this. This is not like a report or anything. I would expect Karl Anthony Towns and Devin Booker to get super max extensions in excess of $200 million. I don't. There's not much to say about that, but
yeah, I don't. No, sorry. Go ahead. I didn't mean to cut you off.
If Minnesota has been bidding for DeJounte Murray from the San Antonio Spurs, the Wolves might not have the best package there. Atlanta has been heavily involved in that. The Knicks have been involved with that. Other teams have been involved with that. If they don't get DeJounte Murray, who frankly would be a terrific fit next to Anthony Edwards and Karl Towns there, I can see why they're going there. It would not surprise me if they pivot and see, especially with D'Angelo Russell as bait, they take a look at Ayton. But I do think Ayton is going to end up with a good contract. I do not think it will be a max, though. Yeah,
and San Antonio's team that I've heard mentioned, certainly with them shopping DeJounte Murray, they seem to be trending toward a rebuild situation where I don't know that paying Ayton a whole lot of money right now would make any sense.
Well, I'll tell you one thing: Jakob Poeltl, Jakob Poeltl would be terrific in Phoenix and a lot cheaper. He wouldn't quite be as dynamic of a player as Ayton.
Well, they've also got a ton of cap space.
They do. They don't have to. They wouldn't have to do that. That's true. But Poeltl is their starting center, and he's a quality starter.
Man, couple other interesting player option decisions as we get past 5 o'clock here. Patty Mills has declined his option. That's I think about $6 million to become a free agent. He will be, I think, a pretty interesting guy for a lot of these teams with the tax MLE. Potentially sign him like the Nets did last year. And the Sacramento Kings declined to give Dante DiVincenzo a qualifying offer at all, making him an unrestricted free agent. That was a disastrous trade on basically all fronts at the deadline. Sacramento gets him from Milwaukee. Milwaukee gets Serge Ibaka from the Clippers, who basically couldn't move when they got him. Then Brook Lopez came back anyway. Just sort of a mess all the way around.
Yeah, that's for the podcast. But yes, that's an interesting. Yeah. Also, I think it's interesting that the Thunder didn't pick up the.
That was the other one I was just about to say. Is that Lou Dort is now restricted and will probably get a pretty lucrative contract, I assume, from the Thunder to stay there.
Lou Dort had one of the most bargain contracts in the NBA. I think he was making less than $2 million.
Yeah, it was a 4-year minimum, but I think he wouldn't have been restricted if they'd let him play out the contract.
Would have been the Jalen Brunson situation. He would have been unrestricted after next season.
They saw Jalen Brunson and said, "No, sir," and they got a ton of
same as the Rockets are doing with Jay Sean Tate, who obviously they plan to keep him as well. They'll get a nice deal.
They got a ton of space below the luxury tax. The Thunder do. There's no reason not to lock that guy up. It would be interesting to see if anybody tried to come in with an offer, but I don't see that. Miles Bridges is another guy that I would say would be kind of under the possibly gettable. At this point, I don't think Charlotte, and it can change quickly. I don't think Charlotte sees Miles Bridges as a max free agent. The question is, does anybody else?
One thing I will say is, unlike DeAndre Ayton, Charlotte has made it vocally very clear they are going to keep Miles Bridges.
Yes, Mitch Kupchak came out at a press conference this week and said, "Hey, we intend to bring him back." And cool. Well, Miles, you got a deal? Well, not yet. That's what you say when you have a restricted free agent. We're going to match all offers. Don't waste your time. We're accepting everything. Oh, really? Well, then how come he hasn't signed? Oh, I don't know.
Because we don't want to pay him as much as he wants.
Right. So if he gets a max offer out there, now here's the thing about restricted free agents. This happens, I'm covering the league for 20 years, and for 20 years I go through this every summer. I hear an agent say to me, who's representing a restricted free agent, they'll say, he's got a max offer. But unless you have salary cap space and have the threat of signing to an offer sheet, I mean, that doesn't really mean anything. I mean, you can obviously attempt to negotiate a sign and trade, but the team doesn't have to do it. So the question will be, will Miles Bridges, from the few teams that have cap space, will he be able to get an offer of max or near max that the Hornets are not willing to match? I think the Hornets are willing to pay the guy well over $20 million a year. I think they do value him. I don't think it's a matter of, I'm not sure that the Suns truly value DeAndre Ayton. In this case, I think they value him. They just don't think, the Hornets just don't think he's a max player. And they got a lot of other big salaries on their books. And they're going to have preparing to pay LaMelo Ball here in a couple of years as well. So they have to think about that. But if you really like Miles Bridges, now Detroit was another team. Miles Bridges is from Flint, Michigan. Went to Michigan State. Obviously, he's a explosive player. I mean, that's a guy who can sell tickets. You want to bring in a guy who's
he's fun to watch.
Sure is.
Explosive player.
There would be some Cade to Miles Bridges lobs for sure, but they no longer
Detroit
have that kind of cap space.
I mean, I suppose they could create it elsewhere, but they have clearly not prioritized going after a major free agent. So that's another one, Bontemps, who's potentially we could see some intrigue with that as well.
Yeah, I mean, it will be very interesting to see. I mean, the only thing I would say is when you said that it's what teams always do, it is not really what the Suns have done in the DeAndre Ayton situation, where there's been basically radio silence since they
There's been no James Jones press conference where it's like, we're bringing him back.
No.
Hey, fellas, we got a humdinger of a Woj bomb. Hawks are trading Gallo and multiple first-round picks to the Spurs for DeJounte Murray. That's a really interesting backcourt in Atlanta now. That's
a big time trade by the Atlanta Hawks.
Okay, so this one has been building for a couple of days now. The Spurs have been mulling whether or not to trade DeJounte Murray for a couple of months. Their toes were in the water a little bit at the trade deadline, and it intensified here, and they decided to do it. You're going to ask, why would they trade a guy in his, what is he, Bontemps, 25, 26?
25 or 26.
Going into his prime.
Why would they trade a guy under contract for 2 more years at good salary, going into his prime? Why would they trade him away? Especially for a guy in Danilo Gallinari, who very likely is going to be released. Gallinari has a partially guaranteed contract. Whatever needs to be guaranteed to execute this trade will be guaranteed. He will be likely released. I'll talk in a minute about where we think he might end up. So why would you do this? And let me try to explain the thought process as far as I know based on my reporting recently. DeJounte Murray is eligible for a contract extension. He and his agent Rich Paul made it known he was not going to extend his contract with the Spurs this summer. And that wasn't really necessarily about the Spurs. His contract is about $16 million on average. When you extend your contract, you're limited into how much of a raise you can get. And it would have been probably below his market value as a 25-year-old all-star. But he pretty much told them, he's like, I'm probably not going to extend next summer either. So the Spurs were looking at a situation here where they were probably not going to be able to retain DeJounte Murray until he hit unrestricted free agency in 2 years. Now, he may have played great. He might get 2 more all-star appearances in those 2 years, but the Spurs realized that his value would probably decline. They could get less for him in a year than they can now. And they're not going anywhere these next 2 years. They're not headed for contention. So the concept here is to get ammunition to help rebuild. And we'll see how many draft picks this comes down. I don't know if
it's what was just reported is 3 first-rounders and a pick swap.
Okay. Yep. So it's a pretty gigantic haul.
Not quite the full Drew Holiday package, but pretty close.
Pretty close.
Right. So this is what now this is a huge move for Trae Young. Trae Young gets a guy who can defend next to him with length,
an
who
elite
can protect
defender.
him on the perimeter. It's a big move for the Hawks, who might not be done dealing. They've been talking to teams about John Collins. This is a big move for the Hawks. Maybe, Bontemps, about the Hawks. Maybe you can see it from their perspective.
This is a big move on a lot of fronts. Let's start with the fact that DeJounte Murray is rep by Rich Paul and Trae Young is rep by Omar Wilkes. Both of them are rep by Clutch. And I think when you're talking about trading for a guy with 2 years left on his deal, I think it's pretty noteworthy that 2 of the teams involved here were the Minnesota Timberwolves, who have Anthony Edwards on their team, rep by Omar Wilkes, and Trae Young with the Hawks, rep by Omar Wilkes. You would think those teams would have a pretty decent indication of whether DeJounte Murray would want to be there long-term if they're going to give up these kind of picks. Certainly, you would think that the Hawks, given this kind of pick package, are going to be expecting him to be playing next to Trae Young for a long time. Now, you mentioned his ability to be a defensive player next to Trae Young. Obviously, that's going to be a critical thing. The other thing I think that's interesting about this is DeJounte Murray is a guy who's used to having the ball in his hands. He's not a great shooter. I think the interesting thing here is that this might unlock a little bit of Trae playing off the ball more. You can have DeJounte attacking, Trae coming off of screens, doing a little bit more Steph Curry type stuff. I think that could be interesting. And I think more than anything, to me, this is a real all in. We talked about at the beginning of this pod, we talked about, the Knicks kind of going all in, not obviously with this kind of price to get a guy like Jalen Brunson. The Atlanta Hawks, 18 months, or I guess it was a year ago, man, it's been a long couple of years, but a year ago, the Atlanta Hawks were in the Eastern Conference Finals and were 2 games away from the NBA Finals. This past year, they were in the play-in tournament, and there was a lot of pressure there to take a step forward and to get better. And this price that they paid, I love DeJounte Murray. He's a great player. This is a huge price to pay for him. And to me, it's a sign that the Hawks are saying, all right, we got to get back to where we were last year. And that's going to be hard in the East, but we talked about where the Knicks are at. The Hawks, they're way ahead of the Knicks right now.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not sure where they rank in the East, but this was a big time, all in, push the chips in move by Atlanta. And I'm really curious to see how it shakes out on the court.
Well, and if you're going to have Trae Young, you need to surround him with very good defensive players. They've got Capella net, they've got Hunter. Now they add DeJounte Murray to that mix. And I think Trae can really benefit from not having to carry the load. First of all, their offense would completely crumble when he came off the floor. That should no longer be the case. And then I think he will benefit from not having the responsibility of creating every single shot, whether it's for him or for somebody else. Like you said, he can play off the ball. I mean, his catch and shoot numbers are absolutely phenomenal. It should be less wear and tear, less physical demand on him. And then, from the Spurs perspective, obviously, it signals going into rebuild. Like you said, Wendy, it is.
Well, let me ask you this. So what you wonder is, the Spurs don't have much. I don't know if they would trade Keldon Johnson. Keldon Johnson's still on his rookie salary. I think if anything, they're trying to figure out a way to extend him. I would think they don't have.
They're going to play their young players. They're going to try to win 20 games, and they're going to try to win the lottery again. That's what they're doing.
Spurs don't tank often, but when they do, there's a generational 7-footer at the top of the draft.
And by the way, there's Scoot Henderson with the second pick, another big time player. Like this, if you're going to tank, this is a year to do it. There's some big time players available.
So Doug McDermott could potentially be on the move. Not that that's something we need to talk about right now. Jakob Poeltl, we mentioned, high quality center. I don't know if they're moving those guys, but it's possible that they could. It's questionable whether they're going to keep Lonnie Walker. They did offer him a qualifying offer. So I mentioned Danilo Gallinari. The rumor is that Miami, especially if they lose PJ Tucker, Gallinari's had interest in playing in Miami for years. There was a negotiation to trade him to Miami a couple of years ago at the trade deadline. He ended up staying with Oklahoma City in that particular year, and then ended up in Atlanta.
Wasn't there some kind of a contract thing involved in that negotiation?
Yeah,
I believe he wanted to be extended, and they did not come to an agreement on it, so they didn't make the trade.
Right. So Gallinari and Gallinari and Miami have had eyes for a while, so it wouldn't surprise me if that's possible. Also, Boston, I've heard, has been mentioned as a potential landing spot, and he'd be a backup, I guess, there. If I think about it. So I don't know if he might be the starter in Miami. I don't know if that would indicate it, but more definitely will be coming. Nothing has surprised us yet that's happened in free agency. Even this trade, we weren't 100% sure.
Free agency has not started yet, Brian. This is the free agency preview pod.
This is
the
pre
collective
YouTube
YouTube
special.
special.
Oh, pre-agency. Okay. Nothing has happened so far that has stunned us, but I promise you, something will. So keep an eye on that. We will be back here on this on our ESPN NBA YouTube channel. You can catch us on the Hoop Collective Pod every Tuesday and Friday with this group every Friday, and
we will have a pod tomorrow night after the first night of free agency, and we'll have
first night of free agency.
Yes. That's what I just said. And we'll have a pod on Friday.
We'll say tomorrow. People may not view this a different time.
I tell you what, I hope DeJounte Murray and Trae Young mesh better than you two.
We'll have our regular pod Friday morning, and we'll have a YouTube special pod on Friday night, wrapping up
By the
the
way,
first couple days of free agency. Just so
between
people know.
us, McMahon, I'm the Trae Young, just so you know. Just because I'm shorter.
We already knew that on all fronts.
Then you get up more shots.
All right. Thanks, Bontemps. Thanks, man. Thank you to our producers. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks for watching ESPN on YouTube. For live streaming sports and premium content, subscribe to ESPN+.